We're going to talk about fun stuff now. Got to do some serious, just so you know that God is present even in the midst of all the serious stuff. But you know what's even more fun is the fact that God is present in the middle of all the creative stuff. And so our theme, yes, has been transformation, and it has also been creativity. And just a couple things. Terry, I just want to let you know as well, later on, if you have a birthday this month, or if you're a newcomer and you haven't been exposed to Science Mind magazine, this is your time to be able to do that. So Terry will be able to give you one of these at the end of service, because you can see we have a few copies and we're happy to share them. And there's one from this month as well that you can take to if you're still interested in that. So creativity, that's really what our teaching is all about, absolutely at the very top. And what we sometimes forget to think about is that we think that everything begins with nothing. And I challenge you to really think about what nothing is. Think in your mind right now, what is nothing? Just want to give you a moment there. So what's happening in your mind right now? Is it filling up with things? Is it filling up with all kinds of ideas about what nothing is? You can't really think about nothing, because really there is no such thing as nothing, no thing, because the actual no thing is filled with the allness that is everything, which is why we think it's nothing, but it actually is something. We just haven't necessarily figured out what it is for each and every one of us. So the creative process begins with that whole whatever amorphous blob out there, whatever you want to call that, that energy, and you can talk about it in scientific principles, atoms and energy, matter, and I'm not a scientist, so I won't go down that path a whole lot, but you can talk about it from that point of view. But eventually, if you keep pushing it out, you still end up with trying to define the very thing that you said is nothing, which is already something. There's a similar principle to this within Taoism. It says exactly the same thing, and it talks about Taoism as being the way. And the moment you start to describe what Taoism is, you run into problems, because you've now said it's in this direction. Well, it's also in all of that other stuff that's over there. Same principle, you could argue, is also within Islam. When they talk about Muhammad and they talk about some of the principles around Islam, again, we don't want to say too much about what that is, because as soon as we start to do that, we start narrowing that vision once again. And our idea within Science of Mind and within Ernest Holmes is for us to keep ourselves open at the top, is what he always said, open at the top, so that we are aware at our highest and biggest level that anything and everything is available for us to choose, and we get to refine that. That's kind of what all creatures are doing. They're refining that creative process and experiencing that and allowing that to come through them and operate outward. I heard a conversation on CBC this morning that said even trees have individualized personalities, that they're communicating with each other as they're growing up. And some of them, it's a German specialist apparently, some of them even live in fear. And they will drop their leaves early because they are not trusting that the universe is there for them, which is kind of interesting. This is an agronomist, a tree specialist out of Germany, who says that there's some connection. Ultimately, it's all connected. So when we think about having nothing, we can do weird things to ourselves by saying things like, I have nothing to say, I have nothing to give, I have nothing to be. We start minimizing ourselves into this false construct of nothingness, when in fact what we could be doing is expanding ourselves into a bigger construct about who we actually are. So Holmes says, creation does not mean making something out of nothing. Creation is the passing of spirit into form and is eternally going on. Spirit cannot change, for being all, there is nothing for it to change into. This is self-evident. So I love that piece about spirit creation being the passing of spirit into form, because that's really what we specialize in, which takes me a little bit into a different kind of way of being able to talk about this. And there's nothing I love better than giving real life examples of how this creative process works. So some of you may know that I come from a Danish heritage. My mother is Danish, and in addition to my mother being Danish, interestingly, my dad, it's a long story, I thought he had a Danish thing, but apparently he had a dentist thing. I can talk to you about that a little bit later. But my stepmom was also Danish. So I'll tell you about the dentist thing. You can ask me about that later. But my stepmom was also Danish. So it's like some part of me needed to be really Danish, even after the divorce. And so I'd been to Denmark quite a few times. And when immigrants come to a new country, there's nothing they love to do more than to hold on to those very, very, very precious things that came from their homeland, right? Because that just grounds people, helps them understand what their culture is and all that kind of thing. So you can imagine they arrived here in 1958, and it was like the heyday of Danish culture. Danish modern furniture. We had that. Of course we had that, right? And there was Danish this, and there was Danish that, and there was Danish jewelry, and don't forget Lego. And, clogs, they're Danish too. Yes, they're Dutch, but they're also Danish. And I can give you a long, long, long list of all of the things that are Danish, because, that I was drilled into me up to about age 10. But then what happened with Danish design and Danish furniture and all the rest of that is that it sort of went through a little bit of a slump. And nothing really was happening for a period of time until about 15 years ago. And there was this really wacky, crazy guy who showed up on the, let's just say, abstract scene. And if any of you have watched Netflix, you might have already stumbled across this particular documentary that I was watching. And it was a guy named Bjarke Ingels, architect. Danish architect, ridiculously young, which is unheard of in the world of architects. And really what he wanted to do was he wanted to become a cartoonist. And his parents said, you might be good at drawing and stuff like that, but how about doing something a bit more practical? Maybe you could try architecture. So he went to architecture school. And today he's only 41 years old. So this is 15 years ago. He started to do a bunch of different projects, and I'm just flipping through here to give you an idea. His first project was a building that was built over some soil that was deeply, deeply, deeply contaminated. And the typical process of how you deal with soil that's been contaminated and you want to build on that, you spend outrageous amounts of time and money cleaning up and or removing the contaminated soil. And so there goes your architect design budget. And then you start building from there. And he said, do we really need to move it? I mean, is it so contaminated? We might not want to walk on it. We might not, we want everybody, the workers, to be safe and what have you. But there may be another way around doing this. So they said, what if we put a sheet over top of the contaminated soil so that there's like a gap between the ground and where the first layer of the building is going to be, like basically put the building on stilts. But they weren't regular stilts. No, he couldn't do that. He had to do, because it was a boat place where they put boats in. So he had to do like undulating, wave-like structures all the way through this. And that was his very first building 15 years ago. Another project that's more recent was a power station. And power stations, very industrial. He decided, what? Power stations don't have to be ugly. They don't have to be anything like that. In fact, they can actually be things of beauty. And maybe you haven't been to Denmark, but they have a good sense of humor, and they have a mountain that they call Sky Mountain. Sky Mountain is 350 meters above sea level. So not a lot of skiing in Denmark. So he said, we got a beautiful power station here. Let's build it in such a way that we'll put a structure up there and you can ski down the side of the power station. Because it's a huge, tall structure. So, we'll just build a ramp and we're going to, do some skiing. So it's still in construction, but that's what he's doing. And the other thing that he decided to do is, there's always the ugly smokestack and that, it billows out and it's steam and all the rest of it. He said, steam isn't a bad thing. Why don't we make the smokestack make a statement? And so the steam comes out in the form of a beautiful holistic circle. It puffs, a nice smoke ring. Puffs, nice smoke ring. The creative process is active. And this guy, his energy is here in Vancouver. This guy is the guy behind the Vancouver house that's going to be wrapping around those two arms of the Granville Street Bridge. So his presence is all over the world. And here's a couple of things that he said. I just wanted to give you that context about them. He says, this is a great quote, he says, "Nobody will trust you to build a building until you already built a building." So that's true of architecture, which is interesting because, he started at age 30, 27, something like that. And now he's building these buildings all over the world. But it's also true of any kind of thought that we ever have. So if you replace the word of a construct, something that you're wanting to create, whatever that happens to be, nobody will trust you to build, fill in the blank, until you've already built a fill in the blank. So where does the trust come from? The trust comes from Spirit. The trust comes from Him being able to connect with something that's much bigger that says, you know what, if I can see this in my mind, I need to be able to find the people, the ways, the means, the support, the community, whatever it is that will help me to facilitate my vision. It starts with the vision, and the vision is heaven sent. It's always heaven sent. So he says, this is another quote from him, he says, "When you start these kinds of journeys, you don't know what's important for you." Or pardon me, I misspoke. When you start these kinds of journeys, you know what's important for you, but you don't necessarily know where you're going. We start with our idea and we think about our idea, about what that is, but we don't know where we're going. So another example, of course, could be the foundation of this very center here. You start and you know what's important to you, but you don't know what it's going to outpicture like. And then he says, if you make your decision on these things that matter to you, no matter where you end up, it's where you need to go. You see that through line that's happening, right? You're maintaining your commitment, for lack of a better word, to the essence of what you are trying to create. So it could be you're trying to create the most amazing relationship in your life. Something that is going to sustain you, support you, and just be an inspiring part of your experience. And so you maintain that vision. You don't let go of that vision, but you don't say, and he, she has to look like blah, 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 blah. That's limiting. We're back to that big idea of the limitation. That's limiting. Open it up wide, but what speaks to you is who you are. And so now it's going to be attracted to you based on that, as opposed to saying, and it must look like this, blah, 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 blah. Well, what if that is not the answer? You've just cut your losses. You've just cut that as a complete opportunity. So what he says is, I couldn't have predicted this when I did this, but they're definitely of a similar spirit. He was talking about the structure of the one with the power station. He was talking about the structure with the power station and the ski ramp and all the rest of that, and talking about the structure of the very first building he did that had the undulating waves with very similar spirit, right? I'm working with the environment that is already present and enhancing it and knowing the beauty that is within it. And I'm allowing that to come through and come out as a support and extension of what's already there. So some of his other ideas was, why do we think that we have to have buildings, and if there's social housing projects, that they have to be, cramped, and they have to be small, and they have to be sort of sterile? Who came up with that idea? Is there a possibility we could do something different? And he said, I think we can do it differently. So he created another building that ends up looking like a mountain, because he has put parking and layered it. The building goes up like this, and the parking is behind it. I don't know exactly how he did it, but parking is behind it, and it's integrated into the building. So it's not like there's a big, horrible parking lot. It's integrated into the building. And each unit, because it's staggered like a mountain, you've got, say, I don't know what the square footage would be, but like 1,000 square foot home, and then you've got 1,000 square foot garden. It's all tiered. So when you look at that building, it looks like a mountain, because all of the gardens is what you're looking at. And all of those people who are there get to have that experience. And he winds it this way so that we can see each other and wave at each other as each of us are walking through this path up to our places and things like that. And there's skateboards. Anyway, it's just absolutely amazing. But he allowed that creative process. He didn't limit it. He didn't stop it. He didn't say, well, because it's only ever been done this way, I have to follow exactly this pattern or it won't work. He said, no, I have to follow what's within me, and I need to see what works around that. Who is that? What does that look like? How do I create that? Who's in for that ride? Who's in for that ride? Because let's do that. So this is the last Bjarke quote I want to give you. He says, I like this idea of architecture as being a way to manifest your dreams into the real world. It's almost like a shaman with brick and mortar. That is the true power that we as humans have, that we actually have such a massive impact on our environment. We can either use it to create a nightmare, or we can use it to realize our dreams. And of course, he says, the latter is much more interesting. So the steps that I would put forward to you from the point of view of Ernest Holmes, and these are all quotes from him. He says, number one, put your mind in touch with universal mind, saying just what you are waiting for. Ask for it and believe that you are receiving it. Not you are going to receive it. You are receiving it right now. It's in process. It's happening. And then wait. Just wait. And after a few minutes, declare that you now know, even though you may not seem to know, yet in the depths of consciousness, you have received the impression, and it will outpicture. It must, because you are convinced, you have declared it, you've allowed it to be so, and so it is. Abracadabra. I've said that before. And so I wanted to do a little exercise for you to sort of really ground into this idea of this invisible whole within us. These are just examples. It's much, much bigger than this. But I think that if you can get a sense of all of this, it'll be helpful to you. And Corey, do we have that slide? I'm so happy. Look at that fancy fading in and out. Ooh-hoo. So we can say this together now, okay? So God is the one indivisible whole within us. So we're going to start with the beginning. Inner presence, great and mighty. Inner light that shines divinely. Inner life that lives completely. Inner joy that smiles serenely. Inner peace that flows so deeply. Inner calm, untroubled, happy. Inner love that gives so freely. Inner truth that never fails me. Inner power that holds securely. Inner eye that sees so clearly. Inner ear that hears so deeply. Inner voice that speaks supremely. Inner good that bind me to thee. And so it is. So thank you, everybody. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you so much.